Good evening. Welcome to Heavy D Storytelling. I'm your host, Heavy D, or David Sneven. So I'm going to be reading Mark chapter, I think we're on 14, and chapter 18 of the Bronze Bow. So, who's going to join us tonight? I know that we're starting a little bit late. I don't know. 18's not very long, 19's not very long, so maybe we will get through two chapters. So we'll see. But we are starting pretty late. I have a presentation that I have to give in my class in 2 days. So that's whenever I have free time, that's what I've been doing. I did manage to turn in my discussion board for my college class that's due today, or not due today, it's due Thursday. So I did do that because I don't know if I'm going to have time between now and then to do it. And the only thing else that I have to turn, actually, well, I have two replies, but I also have some other stuff to turn in next week. So, yay. All right, so we're going to start with Mark. This is chapter 14. I was right, chapter 14. This is the English Standard Version. Hi, Kimmy. So nice to see you, even though I can't see you, but I did see you, and the costume that I saw you in was very cute. So, all right, chapter 14. It was now 2 days before the Passover and the feast of unleavened bread, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him, for they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people. And while he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, really? As he was reclining at table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, why was the ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. And they scolded her. But Jesus said, leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly, I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money, and he sought an opportunity to betray him. And on the first day of unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, where will you have us go and prepare for you to eat the Passover? And he sent two of his disciples and said to them, go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the master of the house, the teacher says, where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room furnished and ready. There prepare for us. And the disciples set out and went to the city and found it just as he had told them. And they prepared the Passover. And when it was evening, he came with the 12. And as they were reclining at table and eating, Jesus said, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. They began to be sorrowful and say to him one after another, is it I? He said to them, it is one of the 12, one who is dipping bread into the dish with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born. And as they were eating, he took bread, and after blessing it, broke it, and gave it to them, and said, take, this is my body. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank of it. And he said to them, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I say to you, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus said to them, you will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter said, even though they all fall away, I will not. And Jesus said, truly, I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said emphatically, if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And they all said the same. And they went to the place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. And he took with him Peter and James and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch. And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. And he came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came the third time and said to them, are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough, the hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. And immediately, while he was speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, the one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard. And when he came, he went up to him at once and said, Rabbi, and he kissed him. And they laid hands on him and seized him. But one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus said to them, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled. And they all left him and fled. And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body. And they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. And they led Jesus to a high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together, and Peter had followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, we heard him say, I will destroy the temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another, not made with hands. Yet even about this their testimony did not agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? But he remained silent and made no answer. Again the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. And the high priest tore his garments and said, what further witness do you need? You have heard this blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him, saying to him, prophesy. And the guards received him with blows. And as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, you also were with the Nazarene Jesus. But he denied it, saying, I neither know nor understand what you mean. And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girls saw him, and began again to say to the bystanders, this man is one of them. But again he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean. But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, I do not know this man of whom you speak. And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he broke down and wept. That's where we will leave it. Chapter 15 tomorrow. Okay. What's the deal with the guy in the linen cloth? I think, and I could be mistaken, that a lot of scholars think that that is actually Mark. But I don't know that for sure. So I know a lot of times these biblical authors, when they themselves appear in the story, they like John is very famous for whenever he appears in the story, he uses a like a pseudonym of sorts. He'll say like the disciple that Jesus loved or whatever. Well, he's really talking about himself. So, but he doesn't want to say, well, I did this. And so instead of saying I did this, he says whatever. And so I'll confirm that. I'll try to confirm that by tomorrow. No guarantees because I do have a lot to do between now and then. But I will definitely look that up and try to find out for sure. Okay. Um, or one of you guys could do that. Okay, so yesterday, I think we only read one chapter yesterday, or did we read two? I don't know. I think we did read two. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so Rosh is not so happy. Daniel gave Thrace the pin that he made, the little bronze pin brooch or whatever it is, and she said you should be a silversmith, and he said, yeah, I'm, and then oh yes, Joel got the information for Rosh that he needed, and then Rosh wound up pillaging basically those people's houses. Um, and um, some people thought that he was a hero, but then at the end of the whole thing, somebody came up to Daniel and said, "Tell Rosh that we're done with him because we don't like him pillaging our town anymore, and he needs to grow up and actually be a real person." And of course, Rosh laughed at him. Let them come, let them get a taste of the mountain. They will only break their teeth on it. All right. So here we are, chapter 18. This book's almost done. We've got 50 pages left. All right. Late in the afternoon, on the last day of the month of Elul, Daniel, looking up from his work, saw a figure hurrying along the road, an unfamiliar figure muffled in a heavy turban and moving with haste that warned him of trouble. He put down his hammer and waited. It was only when the stranger entered the shadow of the doorway and pushed back the turban that he saw it was Thacia. Who could have imagined that Thacia could look like this, stricken, gray-faced, the wet hair clinging to her forehead? "Oh, Daniel," she gasped, "they have taken Joel." "The soldiers?" "Yes. Oh, I knew from the beginning that this would happen. What can we do?" "I knew it too," he thought, with a wave of sickness. "Where is he?" "In the garrison. He didn't come home all night. This morning I went to the harbor and couldn't find him. I didn't know what to do, so I went to Kemuel, and he managed to find out. They have been suspecting the centurion's kitchen slaves. Yesterday 5 slaves were flogged, and when Joel came to the door, they took him." "Did Kemuel find out more?" "They're sending some prisoners east in the morning. They've sentenced Joel to go with them." "Does that mean the galleys?" "Daniel, Joel could not live in the galleys. He—" Through his own horror, Daniel saw that the girl was close to collapse. Numbly, he reached out and touched her shoulder. "Rosh will have planned for this," he said. "He will know what to do." At his touch, she began to weep wildly, her hands covering her face. "She has borne this all night," he thought, "and all day. Has she eaten or rested?" Through the open door to his house he saw Leah standing behind her loom, staring. How much had she understood? With one arm across her shoulders, he led Thacia to the door. "Take care of her," he said to his sister. "I'm going up the mountain." Leah came from behind the loom and held out her arms, and Thacia stumbled into them. The golden head bent gently over the dark one. In 2 hours' time Daniel reached the cave. The thorn fire was blazing, and the fragrance of roasted mutton hung in the air. The men who sprawled on the ground barely glanced at him. At the mouth of the cave Rosh sat, rubbing at a fine ivory-handled dagger. He listened, giving more attention to the blade than to Daniel's distraught message. "He was getting too confident," he grunted. "They can't know who he is," Daniel urged. "Joel would never let them know his father's name. They'll think he's only a fisherman. They won't be looking for an attack." "Attack?" Rosh repeated coldly. "What are you talking about? If we move fast, we can surprise them on the road." "We?" "All of us will help you. You can count on us." "Speak for yourself," Rosh said. "It's not my affair." Anger exploded in a red blaze before Daniel's eyes. "Joel was following your orders," he shouted. "You're responsible for him." Rosh still rubbed at the steel. "On this mountain, every man is responsible for himself. That holds for Joel." Daniel held back his rage. "Listen to me, Rosh." He struggled to speak reasonably. "8 of us took Samson. From the Romans? Use your head. We took Samson from scurvy traders. Roman soldiers? That's another matter." Desperately, Daniel tried a different tack. "Joel is important to us," he argued. "Important? He was stupid enough to get caught. You think I can spare 8 men, or 1 man, for that?" Daniel's control gave way. "You just use him and then let him go? Without even a try?" Rosh squinted up at him. "I've warned you before," he said, his voice ugly. "There's a soft streak in you. Till you get rid of it, you're no good to the cause." The red mist of anger cleared suddenly from Daniel's mind. He looked at the man who had been his leader. He saw the coarsened face with his tangle of dirty beard. He saw the harsh mouth, the calculating little eyes. He saw a man he had never really looked at before. "The cause?" he said with despair. "How could you know what it means?" Fury mottled the man's face. "Take care, you!" "Don't threaten me," Daniel said. "I am not one of your men. Not any longer." Rosh coiled back. "You fool," he spat out. "How far could you get without me?" Daniel looked steadily into the narrowed black eyes. In another moment Rosh would spring at him. At the prospect his hands clenched with savage pleasure, but his mind was in control now. He could not fight with Rosh. The very strength of his hands he owed to this man. And what good would it do Joel? He turned away without speaking and passed through the ring of silent, wary men. He knew that he was through with the mountain forever. As he went down the trail, footsteps came pounding after him. "Daniel, wait!" It was Jockton. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to get Joel." "By yourself?" "No, there are 19 of us." 20, said Jockton. He had drawn himself up to his last skinny inch. "Let me go with you," he pleaded, before Daniel could refuse. Daniel decided quickly. "Come then," he said. "You can't be worse off." Even in his haste he felt a sharp disappointment and regret. He had hoped that the footsteps were Samson's. He would have liked to say goodbye to the big man, to clasp the man's hand, to try to tell him not to watch any more. But this too he must put behind. He and Jockton had the trail to themselves, but as he went down the uncanny feeling grew on him that someone was behind. Had Rosh sent someone to follow him? Time and again he whirled about, but he could see nothing. His skin kept prickling. He quickened his stride till Jockton was running to keep pace. In the watchtower 12 boys waited in the darkness, making no sound. One by one others crawled through the field to join them. Kemuel had summoned every boy in the city. What is Rosh going to do? They greeted Daniel, their faces sober. They read the answer in his silence. Nothing, Nathan cried out, incredulous. After Joel has... His voice broke. The others stared at Daniel, too stunned and angry to speak. I have failed them all, he thought. They trusted me. What does it matter? Kemuel suddenly lashed out with scorn. We don't need your Rosh, your great leader. We'll do without him. Tumult exploded in the watchtower, anger flaring instantly into new hope. Wait, Daniel silenced them. Let's have one thing clear. Maybe some of you think as Rush does, that every man answers only for himself. We answer for each other, Nathan spoke swiftly. A dozen voices echoed him with passion. Kemuel cut sharply across the clamor. Do you have a plan? Yes, said Daniel. At once every boy was quiet. For 19 against a Roman force? 20, said Daniel, his hand on Joktan's shoulder. If we use our heads, we can make 20 count for 100. We won't try to fight them. We will only get Joel. How? Confidence had come back to their voices. On the road, Daniel's mind was working clearly now. We can break into the garrison. We can't break into the garrison. We can't afford to meet the Romans face to face. We can go south beyond Magdala and wait in the pass near Arbela. On the cliff, we can spread out and throw down rocks so that they won't know how many we are. The Romans have no reason to expect an attack. When we have stirred up as much confusion as we can, then we take Joel. How? They questioned. He will be chained. That's a blacksmith's job. There was a silence. One cannot do that alone, said Nathan. I'll go down with you. Before we go on, said Daniel, we must have a leader. Up until now, we have all been equal. We have already chosen, said another boy. You have always been the leader. Not by a vote. There's no need to vote, said Nathan. Does anyone here question who is our leader? Not a whisper challenged him. Then you will obey my orders, said Daniel sternly. He felt no pride or glory that he was their leader, as he had once dreamed, only a cold heaviness. The time has not come to fight the Romans, he told them. We have no right to waste lives that are needed for the cause, even for Joel. You are to stay on the cliff and distract the soldiers while I free Joel from the chains. Then you will all retreat as fast as you can. I don't think the Romans will follow. They'll be leery of a trap. This time they kept silent, not questioning his command. Take all the weapons you have, he ordered. We'll start now and find our place. He hesitated, feeling awkward but compelled to speak. Joel is the one who has always read us the scriptures. Now we'll have to remember the things he has read. Judas and Jonathan and Simon went out with a few against the enemy. We can do it too. The same God will strengthen us. In the darkness, each boy reached out and clasped the hand of the one nearest him. For God's victory, they said together solemnly. Chapter 19. Before dawn, the boys had found their position. In the darkness, they had followed the shore road south past Magdala, striking inland to the place where the Via Maris, the road the Romans must follow to the coast, wound between steep, almost unscalable banks. There they worked their way painfully upward and hid behind rocky projections to rest. With the first light, they ventured out, only one boy showing himself at a time, to collect the stones that would be their weapons. A very few carried spears and daggers. By the time the sun was fully risen, every boy was well fortified and concealed. Even during the night there was traveling on this main road to the sea. During the early morning they counted 5 large caravans, with long files of burdened camels. Families, tradesmen, sometimes small detachments of soldiers passed beneath their hiding place. This had long ago been a dangerous section of the road, but now travelers passed with confidence because, more than 50 years before, the great King Herod had wiped out the robbers who dwelt in the caves of Arbela, and now a Roman wall flanked the heights. So long had it been since bandits had inhabited this place that now Daniel dared gamble that the Romans would have no suspicion of an attack. On the steep cliff below where the boys were stationed, Daniel found the spot best suited to his own purpose. A fissure in the rock extended in the oblique line down the face of the rock, wide and deep enough in some parts to hide several men, ending on a narrow shelf barely 10 feet above the road. In the crevice that dipped below the level of the rocky shelf, he posted Nathan and Kemuel. "I'll free Joel and lift him up to you," he told them. "You reach down and pull him up. If any soldiers follow, use your spears. Only one can climb up at a time, and I think the second will think twice before he tries." "How do you get back?" Nathan asked, looking closely at Daniel. "When Joel is up, then give me a hand," Daniel answered. He had no real expectation that he would get back up the bank, but he meant to see with the last ounce of his strength that Joel did. Nathan opened his mouth, then closed it, seeing in Daniel's eye a reminder that they had chosen a leader. Through the noonday heat they waited, their energy draining away bit by bit under the merciless sun. As the hours went by, Daniel's foreboding deepened. This waiting was not the same as the times he had crouched behind a rock, eager for Rosh's signal. It was no flimsily guarded caravan they awaited, and behind him was no tight-knit band that would move with precision and cunning, only a cluster of untried boys. Even now, as he glanced up, the flutter of a coat sleeve betrayed one of them. Still, he could count on them. He knew that every boy in the band was prepared to give his life. It was up to him, the one they had chosen leader, the the one they had chosen leader, to see that none of them had to. But how different this was from the glorious battle they had hoped for. Would the day ever come when together they could pit their strength against the Romans for God's victory? Daniel put that thought aside. A more immediate worry was the uneasiness that had persisted all night, the feeling that he was followed and watched even in the darkness. Could it be that in setting a trap for the Romans he had led his band into some other trap? Almost he was tempted to call them back. But there was Joel. At mid-afternoon, Joktan brought the warning. He alone of all the band was training to this kind of attack. He wriggled and dodged his way along the roadside and skinned up the cliff into the crevice. "Horsemen," he gasped. "About 8. Then foot soldiers. Then the prisoners." "Did you see Joel?" "No. Too far away. But they've come a distance. The horses are lathered." Daniel gave 2 sharp whistles, the alert they had arranged, and looked up at the bank. "Climb up there, will you?" he growled to Joktan, pointing. "Tell whoever that is to pull in his rump before he gets a javelin in it." That would get Joktan also above the danger line, he reckoned. The first horseman swung into view, moving slowly to keep pace with the footmen. The cavalry rode in pairs, their spurs almost touching in the narrow pass, erect, silent, the plumes of their helmets rising and falling with the horses' pace. Would the others remember? The horsemen were to go through. Daniel tensed. He felt a vast relief as not a sound or motion betrayed the boys on the cliff. Behind the horsemen came the foot soldiers in a double line. He watched them pass, one steely face after another. He counted 16, then shuffled the prisoners, chained together by the ankles in a long line. Joel was the fifth, barefoot, disheveled, his feet dragging. Between him and the rock marched a guard with a heavy whip. Behind the prisoners there would be more foot soldiers. Daniel held his breath. When Joel was nearly below him, he gave the signal. The first rock hurtled through the air and found a mark. A foot soldier stumbled. Instantly the air was flecked with rocks. An order crackled back across the line. As one man, the Romans raised their shields above their heads. 4 men broke from the rank and charged up the almost vertical rock. A stone caught the first in the chest and sent him reeling back. A spear struck the second cleanly, but the line behind them resealed itself into an unbroken, purposeful unit. Daniel's heart sank. He had guessed wrong. The Romans were going to charge the bank, and the boys could not possibly hold them back for long. But in the same instant as his shout for retreat, a thunder drowned out his voice. Jerking back his head, Daniel saw with horror the great rock that teetered on the opposite bank ripped from the cliffside and crashed down, gathering speed and force, carrying with it a roar of dirt and stones. Stupefied, he watched the leaping, frenzied soldiers. There had been no one on the other bank. What had dislodged the rock? Then he glimpsed a shape, huge, crouched like an animal, dodging on all fours along the bank. For one flash he saw the powerful arms, the massive, dark head. Samson. But how? Abruptly he came to his senses. Now was his chance. With a thrust of his arms he pulled himself up to the shelf with rock and leaped. As his feet found the path, he sank his dagger below the shoulder of a guard, and as the man crumpled, dropped to his knees before Joel, pulled out his chisel and reached for the chain. The first blow of the sharpened tool left a nick in the iron. He struck again and saw the nick deepen. Confusion swelled around him. The prisoners were screaming now. He heard a second thudding roar, but he did not look up. As he raised his arm for a third blow, he felt himself seized from behind in a paralyzing grip, lifted clear off the ground, jerked upwards like a helpless sack. For an instant he hung in the air, and then he struck against the rock. Pain whirled him in crazy circles, and through the pain he felt hands clutching and pulling, scraping his flesh along the rock. A heavy body struck squarely on top of him, legs thrashed about his head, and blackness crashed down on him. He came out of the blackness into the blinding sun. There was rock under him, and pain zigzagged through his body. He blinked, trying to focus through the glare. Near him he made out a figure, Joel, sitting with his knees drawn up, his face buried in his arms. "Don't move," a voice warned. Kemuel's face blocked out the sky. "They've about cleared out." Memory came back suddenly. He jerked up and sank back again, helpless against the pain. He saw now that he was in the crevice of the rock, but higher up the bank. "Careful," Kemuel warned. "You've got a broken shoulder bone, I think. Maybe a couple broken ribs." Joel was luckier. "He landed on top of you. He's got hardly a scratch." Daniel's hand groped for his head. It had a familiar shape. It had an unfamiliar shape. "My irons hit you," Joel said, his voice sounding weak and dull. "Good thing," Kemuel spoke to Joel. "How could I have got him up here?" Daniel pulled himself up. "The soldiers gone, but there may be a guard." "They didn't come up the bank?" "No. I think the leader went down with the rock. They never got organized again." "The rock! Samson!" Daniel cried out, remembering. "I saw him up there." Joel and Kemuel looked at each other. Daniel tried to shake his mind clear. "How did we get up here? We were on the road." Neither boy spoke for a moment. "You didn't see?" Joel asked finally. "Not after they jumped on me." "Not the soldiers," Joel said. "It was Samson. I thought at first it was another slide coming down, and then he was there. He threw you onto the rock, right over his head. Then he got hold of my chain and twisted it open with his bare hands, and he pulled me free and threw me up on top of you. Nathan and Kemuel pulled us down inside." It was Samson who had lifted him, and Samson who had been following all night, not knowing what they were going to do, but knowing that they could not do it alone. And Samson, the stupid one, who had hidden on the other bank and routed the soldiers. Daniel stared sickly back at Joel. He made himself ask, "Where is he?" Joel's eyes met his squarely. "They took him. He was wounded. A spear hit him even before he had the chain open." "He might be still—" "No," said Kemuel. "They dragged him with them. He didn't even fight them. He was— You don't need to worry about the galleys, Daniel. He won't live to reach the coast." Daniel turned his head away. Then he saw Nathan sprawled with his face against the rock. The blood gathered in the blackened pool beneath him. "He leaned too far out to pull you down," said Kemuel. Nathan, whose bride of a few weeks waited in his new house. A sob suddenly twisted Joel. Why did you do it? He choked. I'd rather you should have let me. How many others? Daniel asked. We couldn't see the others. Can you walk? Do you think we can climb back to where we plan to meet? I can walk, said Daniel. Crawling, wriggling along the crevice, pulling themselves by fingers and toes, they finally reached the top of the cliff. Daniel lay, panting, almost blinded again by the pain. When he was able to look about him, he saw that 5 gray-faced boys lay flat on the cliff's top. During the next endless hour, 12 more slowly wriggled their way to the meeting place. Finally, they were all together, all but Nathan. They lay in hiding till sundown, not talking much. After the darkness fell, 4 of them went down to the crevice for Nathan's body. They could not hope to take him home with them, so they made a grave on the cliff and left him there. Then slowly, wearily, one at a time, they crept down to the road and made their way north like ordinary travelers. They shared a deep thankfulness that Joel was with them, but the might of Rome, seen close at hand, had shaken them. They knew that without Samson they would have failed, and the eager confidence of the night before would never be regained. Time passes. I think that's actually a good place to stop, because it is already kind of late. And we'll probably get 2 more chapters tomorrow night, especially if we can start a little bit earlier. Sorry, I'm having really long days this week. So, hope you're enjoying the story. I will check on the guy with the linen cloth. I'm pretty sure that's Mark. Right. So, at this time, I will bid you adieu, and I hope that you all have a good evening. And I will look forward to seeing you again tomorrow evening. Let me know when you're done. Good night. Mom says good night. Kimmy says good night. I love you guys. We'll see you tomorrow. I hope Rebecca and Granny Bear get to watch later on. So we'll see you tomorrow. All right. Night.